Our next speaker is a founder of the software mending movement and the host of the Legacy Software Rocks podcast. He's also a very avid science fiction fan. If you want good reading tips, go ask him. I did last night. And he's here to talk today about software mending. So, Scott Ford.
Hello. Thanks for having me. Rotterdam's a beautiful city. I appreciate it. One of the things that I like to do when I speak to an audience is get a survey for a question. So who here likes working on something that they've inherited from someone else, whether it's software or anything else? All right. This room is probably the highest percentage that I've ever gotten for that question. It's usually 5%, maybe 10 is the highest I've seen, I think. So that's fantastic. It's great to know that I'm among friends. I think one of the things that I've tried to combat over the last 10 years, I've been trying to go on this journey to fight this bias that exists in the software industry to demolish the things that we've built and create new things. And there's often really good intentions for doing so. People frustrated with what they've got, they learn about new techniques for building something, and they wish that they could utilize those. Maybe just the problem for discovering what a system does and how it actually works just seems so intractable that the different paths, similar to what Don was talking about, like an alternative path where we start out with a completely brand new technology and a completely brand new approach. When we start with a blank page, that would be so much easier. And I really struggle with this because I think there is a chance for a lot of waste in the work that we do, and for a lot of good knowledge to be lost. And so I've tried to come up with a term for people who like to try to preserve what's already been built and transform it into what we want it to be. I don't like just accepting what exists because it exists, right? No, let's transform it. Let's make it better. Let's embrace it. And so that's some of what I want to talk to you about today is kind of my philosophy and thoughts for how to do that, and just how much I enjoy that work, and there are other people who enjoy that work, and maybe if you weren't one of the people who raised your hands, maybe a way that you can find some joy in having to do that work when it's not your preference. So I call this mending, and to really kind of contrast with making, and I love it. It is so much fun. It's something I find a lot of joy in, whether it's in software, whether it's at home, whether it's with an old piece of equipment that I'm curious about and it's broken and I want to try to fix it. I really like taking things that are broken, in disrepair, maybe neglect, and making them look new again. And I also really like corgis. So my company's name is Corgi Bytes. My co-founder is Andrea is also presenting later today. There will be a lot of corgis in this presentation, so if you don't like the content, hopefully you will at least like the pictures. So I don't know raise your hand if you know what movie this comes from. I'm kind of curious. Okay, wow, that's good too. So I really like this movie. It's Planes, Fire and Rescue. It's by Pixar. If you have kids, you've probably seen it. If you don't, go check it out. It's entertaining, even as an adult. But there's a character in there who, as an airplane, he has a faulty piece of equipment that the whole movie kind of centers around it's going to break and what's going to happen to them. And so a little bit of a spoiler here, my apologies. But he has this moment at the end of the movie where he's like, did you get me a new gearbox? Did you replace it with something new? And there's a character who has a catchphrase throughout the entire movie. He's a mechanic. And his catchphrase is, no, it's better than new. He took what existed and he rebuilt it, and he improved upon it. He made it better than a new component. And to me, that is really the embodiment of mending, is to take something that already exists and make it better than something that would be new. And to me, that is where a lot of the joy comes from. So I wanted to take you on a brief story of one particular experience in outside of the software context that I encountered, this journey. And it's really kind of focused in on home renovation. So I had purchased an old house. It was built in 1920s. And their previous owners had made attempts to improve it over the years. There were aspects of the electrical system that had been improved. There were different additions that were added. Some flooring elements had been changed, or carpet had been laid over hardwood. Things like that. So I really dove in and started to really try to make this house my own and try to transform it into something that was more modern, but also giving a lot of respect to what already existed. And it really all started with this one light fixture that was in the kitchen that my wife wanted to replace. And so we bought a new light fixture from the store. I went to go install it, and as I'm working with the electrical wires, the insulation, because it's so old, the insulation around the copper wire is falling apart in my hands. And I got so scared about, we had a mouse problem at the time, and I got so scared about mice running across wires in the wall, and just the insulation falling off the wires, and what kind of sparks that might cause in the night. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to start a journey to rip out all this electrical wiring and replace it. And that then led to oh my gosh, that's a really big challenge. I've now identified this huge problem, and it's really it's part of the core infrastructure of the building, right? It is it's deep in there. It is hard. It's hard to pull out. It's hard to replace. So I then had to remove the plaster over the walls and expose that. And then now that I've got that done, oh my gosh, there's no insulation in these walls. The house is so old that it just wasn't common practice at the time. So now I have to install that. But now that I've got the walls down, there's an opportunity. I can run Ethernet. I can run audio. I can put some cool switches in. I can run video from downstairs so that I can see what's on the TV. I can have it broadcast into the bedroom. So I started thinking about all these possibilities that felt impossible and would have seemed like a pipe dream if I hadn't kind of gone on this journey to make this improvement. So kind of along the way, finding these other things to improve. So you might be asking, what about software? Let's stop talking about houses. Let's talk about software. So there are a lot of similarities that are worth calling out. And it's not exact, right? You hear this a lot with kind of construction as a metaphor and buildings as a metaphor for software. It's a convenient metaphor, and there's a lot that there is in common. There's also important differences that are important to call out as well. But I think the ethos and the approach that you take is very much the same and very similar, and it's those attributes that I want to talk about today. And I think one of the most important, and the reason why I have it first, is empowerment. The software system that you're working on, kind of going back to the idea of collective ownership from extreme programming, it's yours. It's your software system. The team that is working on it, owns it. It's theirs. So treat it that way. Don't be satisfied with the status quo if you're, don't accept the status quo if you're not satisfied with it. Make improvements, make it better. It's within your power. You know how to do it. You might need to make arguments to leaders to get budget to make the improvements. There might be time constraints or other challenges that you're having to deal with, but it's definitely within your control. You know how to do this, and if you're willing to take on the challenge, you can make it better. You don't have to tolerate things being substandard or frustrating to work with or difficult to work with. And through that empowerment, allow yourself to have some big dreams. Think about what's possible. Like, really kind of explore, like, when you're imagining that green field, that alternative line that you could go down with a completely brand new technology and more modern techniques and more modern tooling, what is it that you're looking for out of that? What is it that you're kind of hoping for, and why are you assuming you can't have that with the current system? And really challenge yourself, like, to explore the idea that you can have that with the current system, and start looking at ways and techniques for doing so. And through that, recognize that there's lots of opportunity for innovation and invention, the kind of thing that a lot of people crave when they're wanting to work on a more greenfield project. That innovation, that discovery, that exploration of something new, by trying to find ways that you can bridge new technologies with old technologies, there is a lot of space for innovation there. There are, however, some real constraints that you do need to consider. You likely still need to deliver. Thinking about a house that I was remodeling, I still needed to live there, right? That's a real constraint. If I could have moved the entire family out of the building, I would have made very different choices. But because I had to live there, it really constrained the effort. I went through this a room at a time. I had to be careful about how much dust was getting swept up throughout the building. I had to be really, really vigilant to test for toxins. I hired somebody to come in to do some asbestos testing, for example, because I needed to make sure that I wasn't going to create an environmental hazard for my family. And on software systems, we have time constraints. We have features that we have to support that we wish we didn't anymore, right? Like, we have customers that insist that the system still behaves a certain way, even when we think it's not the best way for it to behave. We have managers who insist on things being shipped very quickly. We might have business leaders that devalue maintenance and do not see the value in making improvements or keeping something up to date. We have biases against test automation. These are challenges and constraints that we have to deal with on our teams, and they are things that we can try to work against. Next up is tools, and tools, I think, is an important one, and it's often, I find, one of the primary sources of frustration when working on something that you've inherited from somebody else. And I think in reality, most of us are probably working on something we inherited from somebody else. The first day we showed up for a company was very rarely the day that they started the new project. I don't know how many of you are in this room who have had that experience where you got to build something purely from scratch. Yeah, it's rare. It's rare, right? Okay, it got less rare as more hands went up, but I think it's still a majority of folks in here who they've never worked on a completely brand new project. It's always been something they inherited from somebody else. Every job that they showed up on, something was already built, and they're being asked to then work on top of it, and asked to do better things with it. Most of their work might be feature development, but it's within the context of this existing system. And it's the tools that I really think deserve a lot of focus. There are so many software teams that I've seen over the years that are still using the tools that were used to build the original system. The same versions, the same libraries, the same frameworks, the same components. There are visual, companies that are, built a system with Visual Studio of a particular version, and they insist on continuing to use that same old version. And it creates a big challenge for the IT team because that old version might not install correctly on newer versions of Windows. So then that puts backward pressure on, now you have old versions of Windows. And the thought experiment I would like you to consider is kind of reflecting back on that old house. My house was built in the 1920s. When I wanted to make improvements to it, I didn't go to the hardware store and ask them for the section of the store that had 1920s materials and tools, right? I didn't say, I only want to use hand tools and nails that were, constructed, or made by a local blacksmith or something like, well, probably not in the 1920s, but if it was much older. No, like I used the best hammer I could get my hands on. I used power tools that made my job easier, right? I didn't just accept that I had to make improvements to the structure using the technologies that were used to create it. I could bring more modern tooling to bear. I could bring more modern techniques to bear. Sometimes I had to. One of the challenges I ran into on that building was changes in standards on the sizing of the lumber that goes inside of a wall. The dimensions are different now than they used to be with the standards in the United States. So, that's something I had to adjust for, that I had to account for. So, if you're on a software system or on a software team that is still using really old tooling, and that's part of your frustration, I really encourage you to find a way to upgrade those things and really make those improvements, and it will improve your quality of life and likely your team's productivity as well. Through all of this, I think it's also to consider safety. And within a software context, I think safety is you're not going to break something, right, in an unexpected way. So this is likely going to involve, some form of test automation is one of the, one of my favorite ways to bring safety on a software system. I think of an automated test as a safety net that can catch you if you've made a mistake. If you're, I like the metaphor of a tightrope walker, and when a team is first getting started out on a software project, the tightrope is really close to the ground, right? The risk of falling from this high is pretty low, right? So you don't build the test. You don't need the safety net, right? You're not going to fall very far. And the team that's originally building it, they have the experience of learning how to walk a tightrope, while it's that low. And so as the tightrope gets ratcheted up over the years, they're comfortable going across it back and forth just fine without a net, right? It's when somebody new comes on the team that they look and they're like, oh my gosh, you're working 100 feet off the ground without a net. What are you people are crazy. How can I possibly do this safely? That's when you might realize that, okay, there's a need for a net. And so I think as you're making some of these foundational changes, if you are introducing tooling improvements, if you are trying to embrace the system to turn it around and really make it your own, making sure that you imbue safety into your work, and that you're trying to make sure that you're not going to create an excuse for your manager to say, you never should have gotten that funding to make that improvement, right? Because if you have an unexpected disaster where like data is lost or people can't get their work done, then that's not going to help your efforts to make improvements in the future. Adopt the language of experimentation. Allow yourself to recognize that some of your efforts will fail. And within the context of an experiment, if you instead move away from failure as a description of like, I didn't get the outcome I expected. With an experiment, I didn't get the outcome I expected is okay, right? Like that's an interesting experiment. The boring ones are the ones that work out the way you expected. Those are the ones we don't learn anything. It worked exactly as I expected isn't all that fun in science. It's the ones that come out in novel ways or interesting ways that really kind of force us to grow. So allow yourself to create these experiments and recognize that the only way to fail, truly fail, when performing an experiment is to not learn anything. If you don't learn anything from your experiments, then you've wasted your company's money. You've wasted your organization's money and time and resources. So develop a way to learn and instill that learning and capture that learning so that it can be carried forward to other efforts. And be willing to conduct these experiments and use the language of experimentation when talking to leaders about what they can expect. And kind of recognize that there is some element of invention in the work that we do. A lot of software, like comparing to the building metaphor, we're inventing the materials that we use on the site. Like there are very few buildings in the world where you have a metallurgist show up on the site and develop a completely new kind of steel at that location that's going to go into the building, and it'll be the first time it was ever used in this building. We do that with software all the time. We build entirely new components and frameworks just for the system that we're using, and it may never be used again on another system. There is that invention. We are creating things that did not exist before in order to solve problems, and that requires some amount of experimentation. It's going to lead to things working in unexpected ways, and you need to account for that and allow time for that. And find the joy in it, kind of getting back to the whole point of this conference, like the discovery. Like, you will find new techniques and new ways to solve problems, and like, that's cool. That's a lot of fun. Also, be prepared to put in some effort. Kind of going back to that idea of experimentation and like, things not working the way you expected. Like, there are going to be elements of, taking on this work of like, on this mending journey that are not going to be super fun. They're going to require, it's going to require some diligence. It's going to require hard work, and that hard work can be its own reward. And through that hard work, we can actually level up ourselves. We can level up the other team members that we have. We can allow more junior people to stand on our shoulders and reach greater heights than they might have if they hadn't attempted to tackle these challenges prior to working on them. There is a lot of opportunity that we can explore and discover on these aging software systems. And they will make us better as developers if we really grapple with these challenges and take them on. So I hope that gives you a teaser into like why I love being a mender, and maybe a little bit into some fun Corgi pictures as well. And really just trying to kind of tie everything back to that quote that really kind of got me kind of thinking about, really kind of looking at this concept and trying to talk about it more deeply, and these places that I draw inspiration from, and these ways of working that I find a lot of joy in. And for me, it's embodied by this attitude of like, no, like, you can make it better than new. Like, you can take something that's old and you can make it even better than it was before, even better when it was first built. And because why would we build it to be the exact same? That's not interesting. That's not fun. That's just pure repair work. Like, like doing that over and over again would not be as exciting. It was probably not the reason why we got into software. Not like, problem solving is what drives us. So finding ways to make something even better than it was before is where we can really derive a lot of satisfaction. I'm wrapping up. I'll have a little bit of time for questions. If you're interested in talking more, please stay in touch. These are ways to get in touch with me. As was mentioned by Alex, I do have a podcast and a community, Legacy Code Rocks. In addition to the podcast, we have an online Slack team over at slack.legacycode.rocks. And through there, you can find information about our weekly virtual meetups. They are at 1 p.m. Eastern every Wednesday, so maybe after dinner for you all here. It'll be like 7 p.m. We do have folks from Europe join us regularly. There's a developer in Germany who regularly joins us. He's usually drinking a pint of something while he's chatting with us after dinner. And yeah, it's a really great time and a really great experience. And I often joke that it's kind of a support group for folks who are working on systems that maybe they would rather not be, right? They're kind of dreaming of that system that was more modern or was more of a blank page. And it's also where people who like doing this can hang out and learn from other people who also like doing it, and really kind of swap stories and share frustrations about how difficult it was to get budget, or how challenging it was to solve a particular problem, or to replace a component, or to upgrade a major dependency. Those are all challenges that we encounter regularly. So this is the end. The chuckles mean you got the joke. That's great. So any questions? And I'm going to drink some water while you're moving the mic.
Yeah. You were talking about mending systems. You didn't talk about mending people. Old grumpy people. Yeah, we have doing that for all the time. We are used to using for loops instead of link or Java streams or whatever. That's how we done it, and all the time. Of course, you encounter those people. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, mending people is dangerous. I love fixing things. I like just naturally gravitate towards something's broken. It's not working the way it should. Like there's dissatisfaction that's being expressed. I want to dive in and fix that. In my personal relationships, this can be challenging because I see qualities in my friends and my loved ones that I wish they didn't have, and I try to fix them. And it's not a healthy way to interact with people you care about, right? You need to find other ways to encourage people to improve themselves, right? You can't fix them, right? If they're not able to find that personal motivation, then that's not something that you can solve for them, right? You can't change their habits for them. You can't change their motivations. There are some intrinsic qualities that can't be changed. And so attempting to do so isn't super healthy for your relationship with that person. If it's something more kind of fundamental to their lives, you can encourage therapy, right? Like you can maybe seek out the help of HR if you think it's maybe a lack of professionalism. You can talk to your boss if things along that lines. You can encourage them to read or engage with training materials. You can maybe advocate to their manager that they get some time to look at training for different aspects. Maybe they come across as rude and they don't realize it, so some communications training would be helpful. But I think that's more the secret, is finding ways to help them level themselves up instead of you fixing them. I think that can be dangerous. Anyone else? Down.
Sorry, do I see anything?
So,
Hi, thank you for your talk. I think my question is sort of an extension on what he said, because I agree with your demolition bias, and you want to make things better. But often the reason behind the demolition bias is also to make things better.
yes.
And then they don't get better.
Yes.
You end up with the same spaghetti code or no test automation or whatever because of the company culture. And I feel like he was asking a bit about how, if you don't address the culture, then the software will end up in the same state and you will demolish it again. So how would you address a culture problem?
Yeah, so a big part of culture for organizations that are producing software systems really kind of goes back to the Conway's Law, which was introduced by Mel Conway. And it's this idea that the organizational structures of a business will be reflected in the systems that they build. And a lot of times, some of those challenges that you're talking about can be kind of discovered as the root cause for just how the organization is structured. If changing that is outside of your control, then you can try to find ways to mitigate those challenges. Maybe just kind of recognize that, like, if the organization has like 2 headquarters, right? Then the way the systems that are built by a team in one headquarters is going to look entirely different than a team in another headquarters, and just accept that as okay. So sometimes there's a bit of acceptance. But I think the story that you were talking about in terms of like starting over from scratch and still ending up with the same mess, like that's not, like you want to try to avoid that. So there's usually some, and I find this to be one of the most challenging things, is because it's usually leaders. We were talking about this at dinner last night, but I do think that there is a little bit of software literacy in the business world that's lacking in terms of assumptions that people make. There's an exercise that Andrea, who'll be speaking later, gave, where she was using Lego as a metaphor to try to teach business leaders like how difficult modifying a software system is. And she just gave people a bag of bricks and then asked them to start building to some specifications. And then she said, uh-oh, we've had a security vulnerability. All the yellow bricks have to be replaced with the red ones. And then she was like, but it's not going to be hard. My kid plays with Lego. How hard can it be, right? You can get it done quickly, right? And I think there's some of that attitude can come from business leaders, and so there is a little bit of training up that we need to do to help leaders realize how complex and challenging some of the work that we're being asked to do, and how, if some of these cultural changes aren't made, that we will end up with the same mess. And hopefully you have some business leaders that have been around long enough that you can use those past stories to say, hey, we've tried this several times before and we failed. What if we try something different this time? What if we try turning what we have into what we want instead of starting over? So.
Reminds me, because you mentioned teams sticking with really old tools up to the point where it incurs a pretty high cost.
Yeah.
So what do you think is the motivation behind that? By still sticking with old tools, even if it gets really expensive and costly?
Yeah, I think some of that motivation comes from an attitude of if it's not broken, don't fix it. Like, it's something I hear a lot. Also, the idea that just because it's old doesn't mean it's bad. I think it's very true. How many people here use Vim or VI, right? Like, that's an example of something that's old, and that's okay, right? It's great. You're very productive with it. I'm sure the people who raised your hands, I'm not productive with it, but I've seen Vim Golf, and just the wizardry that people who are really proficient with that editor can be is amazing. So that's a piece of very old technology, but like, what version of it are you using, right? Are you using the version that was published in 1950? Probably not. Like, there have been a lot of improvements to that editor's ecosystem over time. So, you can, even if you are necessarily staying within a particular technology ecosystem, make sure you are staying up to date with the versions that they're coming out with, because those have added improvements over the time, likely to make your life easier. And I think sometimes it's awareness, not recognizing that they're available. But I'm out of time. If you have any other questions, please come find me later. I love chatting about this if it's not obvious, so thanks.